Prepare yourselves for the most original concept for a video ever. That's right, today's video we're going to be ranking every episode of Series 12, which, as I said, is the most original concept for a Doctor Who related video in the history of mankind. Scientists have been pondering it for centuries, and I have finally cracked the code to make a Doctor Who ranking. I know, right? But in all seriousness, this is a list I wanted to do for a while because of the lists that I've seen, not many people have the lists that I do, with one exception. Now, as always, I used a preference revealer, specifically the Meta B-List 2 podcast preference revealer, to indicate what my least favourite and favourite episodes were of this series, and they put the two-parters as one story. So with that said, we've got 8 stories to rank, so without further ado, let's get started. In 8th place we have, wait for it, say it with me now, Orphan 55. Now, as I said, this will be no surprise to anyone, and this is the story that I was talking about. This was the exception to the rule. This was at the bottom of every list that I watched, and it's not hard to see why. Incredibly basic story, nothing really interesting, too many characters, and the forced-in political message at the end was just so poorly handled and poorly executed. The monsters were just rip-off hoiks. The characters were irritating. You got, obviously, Vilma and Benny, who, at least they've launched a bunch of memes, but outside of that, it's just not entertaining to watch at all on its own. Even the main cast are annoying. Well, Jodie's always annoying, but I mean, even Graham I found annoying in this one. Just nothing about this episode is appealing to me whatsoever. The twist that it's actually Earth felt like something I'd seen a million times done better in other places. It just didn't offer anything interesting. I was at least hoping for a fun Base Under Siege romp, but what we got instead was the companions and the Doctor meandering about with a bunch of people for an hour, and then talking about global warming at the end. That's essentially what this story was. You add on to the fact that the special effects, I don't talk about special effects much, but they really don't hold up in this one, especially when the dregs are out in the sunlight. It just looks so bad and cheap. When they're close up, they look good, which is probably why they introduced the dregs by having them be close-up shot. But as soon as they're outside, it's just, it looks terrible. But yeah, this episode just offers nothing of value really, and just served to kind of deflate the hype that was built up by Spyfall. So it's just a reminder that, it's still a Chris Chibnall series of Doctor Who. In 7th place, in much a similar vein, we have Praxeus. Now, I'll give Praxeus this, it handles its messages considerably better than Orphan 55. However, that doesn't stop it from being really dull and boring. It's just boring to watch. Once again, it suffers with the same issue that Orphan 55 and most of the episodes on this list do, where it has way too many characters. The sci-fi concept was basically just plastic in the ocean, and it just wasn't interesting at all. I do think that this episode would have benefited from being like the Sea Devils or something, because at least that would have some, return value. Or maybe the Autons, as were even suggested in the episode by the Doctor herself. Once again, the companions themselves don't really offer anything of note, with the exception, I suppose, of Yaz being excited at the thought of finding her own alien planet, only to realise that it was just some sort of ship underground. And nothing about this episode is appealing at all to me again. I mean, it's executed better than Orphan 55 was, but again, that's not saying an awful lot. I thought the astronaut people were just kind of pointless and didn't really add anything. I thought the twist villain was just a complete non-presence. Yeah, it just didn't do anything at all for me, this one. In 6th place, we have Ascension of the Cybermen and Timeless Children. Now, the reason that this is in 6th place is purely because of Timeless Children. I didn't think Ascension was that bad, but obviously the list that I've used compiles them as a 2-parter, so that's how we're going to do it. It's honestly just... it's the canon thing for me. I know some people love the canon editions, some people say it doesn't contradict anything that's come before, but I don't really know how you can think that when it literally shows a different origin for the Doctor than what we know. And I just think that the whole idea of the Doctor being this pinnacle of Time Lord society, being the one who birthed regeneration, the true originator of regeneration, just adds so many plot holes and contrivances to a lore that already had a bunch of plot holes and contrivances. For example, why did the 11th Doctor have the extra regenerations in Time of the Doctor if the Doctor could regenerate endlessly? It just didn't make a lot of sense. Outside of that though, these episodes, especially Timeless Children, it's just a lot of exposition. There's not really a lot going on for a majority of it. In fact, 13 spends the majority of Timeless Children asleep. And it just... I think that just goes to show you how lackluster this finale was. Much like Chibnall's previous effort of finale, Battle Around Score of Carlos, this episode is also equally as, mundane. I mean, at least the concepts in it are a bit more interesting, but it's still just exposition and dumping. And the Cybermasters still look dumb, and I can't get over it. The only saving grace of this 2-parter, honestly, is Sasha Doran's Master. And I guess the Brendan plotline, but even that's kind of ruined by the revelation of what it actually was. Yeah, this 2-parter is just a really, really lackluster finale. It's probably better than Battle Around Score of Carlos, but again, that's not saying an awful lot. Moving into 5th place then, we have Fugitive of the Judoon. Now I get the feeling that people are going to rank this higher than 5th place out of 8, but to be honest, the thing about this episode is it's much like Timeless Children. It's just a lot of exposition that sets up other things. And the things that it sets up didn't really pay off. And I said in my original thoughts on this episode that this episode's ranking is going to be very dependent on what happens, where all the stuff goes. And considering where they decided to take all of the other plot elements that they introduced, I think middle is about fair for this episode. It's not really egregiously bad. The Judoon were fun, and Ruth was pretty good as the Doctor, better than 13 I would argue, but it's still just exposition that suggests that other things. Captain Jack's cameo, while fun, was entirely pointless, and I kind of feel like if you're gonna get Captain Jack back, get him something back for better than just this. I mean, I think he's probably gonna be in the Christmas special anyway, but still, come on. You had Captain Jack back, and the best you could think for him to do was deliver some sort of vague hints at what the finale is. It was just incredibly lackluster to me. Obviously, the companions, again, don't do an awful lot. I thought that Yaz was actually going to get some development with the Judoon actually being police and her being a police officer. That could have led to some nice sort of character drama, like how they deal with things, how the Judoon deal with things, and how human police officers deal with things. That could have had some really interesting commentary behind it, but instead, she just gets sucked away by Jack halfway through, so the Doctor can have a chit-chat with her other self, and it just wasn't interesting at all to me. The whole idea of Ruth being the Doctor, I found, was it felt fanficky, to be honest. It was oh, this is actually a thing that has the Time Lord essence inside it, the alarm on the bell tower. It was just stupid, and realistically, if this episode didn't have the reveals that it did, would it really stand as an episode? Same with Timeless Children, and as an episode on its own, would that stand up? I don't think it would. Coming in at 4th place, we have Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. Now, this one is probably the most traditional Doctor Who episode that we've had in the entire Chibnall era so far, I would argue. It feels very Russell T Davies, maybe a bit too much like Russell T Davies, which is kind of its downfall. It feels like a lot of stuff that we've seen before. It kind of feels like Shakespeare Code combined with Runaway Bride, and this is what you get pretty much. it's not done badly or anything, it's just not that memorable. I feel like if this episode was in any other series, it would be seen as eh. Whereas because it's in this series, it's in the top half of the list because, you know, it actually worked as a story and didn't really, you know, do any political stuff from memory. Some things were pretty dumb though, like for example when Yaz is running away from the spider things, I can't even remember what they were called, and she knocks over the bread bowl and that all of a sudden stopped all of the spiders. It was fine, it was decent, but like, that's all I've got to say on it. It's not really that interesting at all. As I said, the villain, as everyone says, is kind of just a B-Tech Ragnos, nothing really of note. It worked fine. I at least tied into the historical figure as well, which is something that has been sorely lacking in the historicals that we have gotten from the Chibnall era, so that's something at least. But yeah, in the end, this episode's just kind of average, and I feel like if it was in any other series, it would be seen as average. In third place then, we have what was, I thought, my favourite episode of the series, which was Can You Hear Me? Now, looking back on it, I think I was a bit too nice to Can You Hear Me, because whilst I do like the concept of dream episodes, it's one of my favourite concepts for Doctor Who episodes, they don't actually use the dream aspect nearly enough. They have one dream sequence that lasts about 5 minutes, and then it's just back to trying to stop the god things. The entire subplot with the woman in, I can't remember where it was, but where she was in that country and they had to go there and try and rescue her from this monster, that was just all pointless. You could have got rid of that. I thought that the way that this episode handled the topic of depression, I found like it glossed over it way too much. As someone who's dealt with it before, I will say that I thought that the way it handled it, I didn't even know it was about depression until like, you know, the end of the episode. I was like, oh, that's what it was trying to go for, because it was just so poorly implemented. The villain, I'll say the main one, I mean Ian Gelder, he was good. I didn't really see a point to the female god, and that still holds true. She didn't really add anything for me. I think it could have just been Ian Gelder, and I think it would have worked fine. The actual horror elements were pretty well done. They were weirdly disturbing, which I liked. The reason that this episode is number 3 is purely because of its concept. As I said, I love dream episodes, so having an entire episode based off of the companions having bad dreams, I liked that. And I liked that these villains were actually a threat to the Doctor, even though they were kind of easily dealt with in the end, which I found a bit lackluster as well. Yeah, in the end, again, just average. In second place then, we have The Haunting of Villa Diodati. Now, I originally thought that this was just okay, but looking back on the rest of the episodes, I think that this one is probably one of the series' best, which is why it's here. The Returning Monster. It does it in such a way that it doesn't feel like cheap, like the finale does, or Fugitive of the Judoon. It feels organic. I'll say, I found the Lone Cyberman a bit goofy in places in this episode, and I thought that it would have worked way better as a Weeping Angel story, but I've said that multiple times now. Yeah, this one was just, it was well executed, and the horror elements were sort of well woven into the science fiction stuff, with the whole perception filter stuff. The whole idea of ghosts just maybe existing, I thought was a bit of a lame twist, but I thought that this episode worked quite well, and I think that they should do more like it. I think having a Cyberman who is actually a threat, I liked that. I think that's something we've needed for a long time now, because far too often they just feel like generic robots, so having one that kind of had that split personality angle with the human and the cyber technology, I really liked. I thought the Cyberium felt straight out of a fan fiction though, and I also thought that the side characters, unlike most episodes, were pretty decent, even though the main cast, once again, don't really do a lot for me. That's a complaint I have with all of these, is that the side characters, the main cast just don't really do a lot for me, and I think that when the main cast don't do a lot for you, that is going to taint your view on these episodes, because they're the thing that you spend the most time with. I mean, if you want to talk about bad side characters, I mean, we could look at Hyphen with a 3 from Orphan 55, the worst side character, I think, in Doctor Who history, probably. In first place then, we have the Spyfall two-parter. In my opinion, the series doesn't get any better than this. It reached its peak with its first story. I think the Return of the Master was well handled. I think the villains, while a bit unoriginal, feeling a lot like the Army of Ghosts, Cybermen were well executed as well. I thought Barton was an interesting antagonist. I thought the spy theme was interesting. Once again, it did have its cringy jokes with the snap and the laser shoes, but I thought that it at least showed some promise, which is more than I could say for Series 11. It brought back some stuff, which I appreciated. It didn't feel overly reliant on it, though. Obviously, the Return of the Master was like a surprise at the end of Part 1. However, I don't know whether this would be highly as regarded by fans if he wasn't in that shock reveal. Part 2 was not as strong as Part 1 in my opinion. Some people think it's stronger than Part 1, but for me, I thought that the conclusion was really rushed and it could have benefited from a third part. And I thought that, in general, it just wasn't as strong and there was a lot of sort of waffle. I thought the side characters, again, didn't really contribute much and were just kind of there to say, hey, we've got these pretty powerful women on screen together. Yay, but they didn't really say anything to, like, show you how important these women were, really. They just kind of existed in the plot. Onto nitpicky stuff, the Master's TARDIS was really underwhelming. I know that is nitpicky, but I was really hoping to see a nice TARDIS, and then we got that. It was just a bit underwhelming. One thing I will say is that I appreciated the sort of length that it did to develop Yaz a bit, because she was actually going off and doing her own spy stuff, whilst Ryan was pretty much useless. I thought this was better, but not great, and I think the reveal of Gallifrey at the end, while shocking, again, didn't really go anywhere in the end, which is probably why my views on these episodes are worse than they were prior to the finale, because the stuff that it set up wasn't really that good. So yeah, that's my opinion anyway, and if you guys enjoyed the twists and enjoyed these episodes in general, that's totally fine, and I'd like to hear your lists down in the comments below. As always though, everyone, there's links to my Twitter and my Discord in the description. I hope you like the new art style that I'm going for, with the whole TARDIS in the background and me in the centre. I hope you like it. If you guys want like a nickname like my fans, I know Channel Pup's got the Home Dogs. So if you guys want a nickname, put your suggestions for a nickname in the comments below. But as always, everyone, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you. Miracle of the Time Lord? Ha! Nothing miraculous about it. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's more of a disease.
The destroyer of worlds reduced to this, a man whose only purpose in life is to wish for his death.
Extraterrestrial!